Hi everyone, welcome back to the next review video for the Biology or Living Environments regions. This is Unit 1, Topic 2. So the first thing we're looking at are the characteristics of life or the life processes. And these are the processes that all organisms must undergo in order to survive. So the first one we have is nutrition, which is taking in and breaking down food. So for humans and heterotrophic organisms, that's eating other organisms and then digesting them to break down food. And then for autotrophic organisms like plants, they have nutrition through photosynthesis, generating sunlight and taking in sunlight and generating glucose from that. Now, the second one we're going to look at is synthesis, and synthesis is building larger molecules. So this is the process of taking smaller molecules or monomers and through synthesis making these larger molecules and polymers. This can include making proteins or any other molecules that are necessary for life. So organisms need to be able to take small molecules and make large ones. The next one we have is excretion, and excretion is a process of releasing waste. So this can be done either with large systems, such as the human excretory system with like the bladder and the kidneys, or it can be done individually on smaller cellular levels using things like the cell membrane, which controls what enters and leaves the cell. Next, we have transport, and this is the absorption and circulation of materials. So this relates to how they move certain materials around either the body or the cell, and all organisms must be able to transport various things. Now, the next one we have is respiration. And this respiration here is not talking about breathing, like inhaling and exhaling, but rather it's about cellular respiration. So respiration here, it means releasing energy from glucose molecules. This is when all organisms must undergo cell respiration, and that occurs for example, in humans in the mitochondria, and produces ATP, or energy. So this creates the energy for all other life processes and all other things that we need. The next one we have is regulation. And it relates to control and coordination. So organisms must be able to control themselves and control what's going on. So we're not just involuntarily spasming and our cells aren't doing whatever they want. There's specific regulation and control, which comes in cells from the DNA in the nucleus, and then for larger body systems, this is done by various systems. For example, the nervous system and my brain is controlling all the words I'm saying. Next, we have metabolism, and metabolism are all the chemical reactions in an organism. So metabolism is the total sum of all synthesis reactions, all hydrolysis reactions, all forms of chemical reactions that occur in an organism to generate various different products and molecules relate to metabolism. And now the final one down here I have is reproduction, and reproduction is the creation of new offspring. So the reason I have this one bolded, and the key thing about this is that it's not needed for individual survival. So reproduction, in order for an individual to survive, they do not have to reproduce or create new offspring. So an individual can go through their entire life never reproducing and survive just fine. However, reproduction is a characteristic of life because all organisms must have the capacity to reproduce, and because it's necessary for species survival. So if an individual doesn't, it's fine, but if everyone in the species stops reproducing, then the species would go extinct. So it's still a process of life, but it's not needed for individuals. Okay, now the next thing we have in this lesson is looking at classification or taxonomy. So we want to look at the levels of classification, and these go in order from most general to most specific. So the first one we have is a domain. The domain is the largest category, then kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and finally species. So these are just the levels that you're going to have to remember, but there's a specific way, at least this is the one I use that helps me remember, and it's a mnemonic. So the phrase I use to remember is did King Philip come over for good soup? So, did King Philip come over for good soup? And then obviously the first letters all relate to the levels of classification, and this just helps me remember the order. And the other thing you want to remember is that it goes from broad, so at the top, domain is the most broad, all the way down to most specific. So all the way down to species is your most specific. And those are the levels of classification. You want to know also that these levels are done based on structural similarities, not based on the environment. And it's really just how closely related organisms are. It's based on how close their names are. So the last thing we're going to look at in this lesson is binomial nomenclature. And the prefix bi and bi indicates two. And the way this is the scientific naming system. What you want to note is that it is universal. So this is a universal naming system, which means that all scientists from across the world, if you give their scientific name using binomial nomenclature, then they're going to be able to identify the organism. And the way this works is that it uses the two names. So it goes genus, and the G or the first one is capitalized for genus, and then species, and that is lowercase. So this is the key thing you want to remember. Their name, because bi uses the two most specific. So an organism's name includes their genus name and their species name, and the genus is always capitalized, and the species is always lowercase. For example, Homo sapiens, which is humans, the H in Homo would be capitalized, and the S in sapiens would be lowercase, because Homo is our genus name, and sapien is our species name. So that's binomial nomenclature, and you want to know sometimes it will give you their genus and species, and you want to be able to name the organism. So now we're going to look at two review questions here. First, we have number 1, which life function is not necessary for the survival of an individual organism? And this is what we were looking at before. So A is nutrition, which would not be our answer. If an organism wants to survive, it needs to take in some form of food. If it doesn't eat anything, then it's going to starve to death. The next one we have is reproduction, which would be our best answer because we know that an individual can survive, and because it says individual organism. An individual organism can survive without reproducing. However, it's the species that requires reproduction. But just to be safe, we'll look through the rest of our answers. We have excretion, which is not going to be our best answer because if we're not able to excrete toxic waste, it will build up in our system and cause the death of an organism. And finally is response to stimulus. This one most closely relates to is another word, a way of saying regulation. Organisms need to be able to respond to external changes to help control and coordinate and maintain a stable internal environment, or otherwise called homeostasis, which is necessary for any individual survival. So our best answer here would be B. The second question we have is which classification category is most broad? And it lists out phylum, family, genus, and order. So here is where we want to use our mnemonic. It goes, did King Philip come over for good soup? And we want to see which is most broad. So first we have phylum, which is right there. I'll put a little star. Next is family, which is down here. So family is more specific, so we can cross that out. Genus is all the way down here below family, so it would not be genus. And then order is right here. So our best answer using our mnemonic would be phylum, because phylum comes before all of the others. And that's everything for this video. Thank you guys for listening.